Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax. Story 1. It was a few months after I had left my previous job, and I was on the hunt for something new. The job market was competitive, and I had been applying to positions left and right, hoping to land something soon. One afternoon, an email landed in my inbox that immediately caught my eye. It was from a well-known company, one I had admired for years, offering me an interview for a position that seemed tailor-made for my skills. The email was professional and detailed, referencing my experience and qualifications. The job offer felt legitimate, better than most of the generic responses I had been receiving. The company's logo was there, the contact details matched, and everything seemed perfect. They even included an application form for me to fill out and return to schedule the interview. I was excited. This was the break I had been hoping for. Without much hesitation, I downloaded the attached application form, which came in a document file, and opened it to fill in my information. It asked for the usual details: name, address, work experience, but also some more personal questions that felt slightly intrusive. They asked for my ID number, my social security number, and a copy of my most recent pay stub. That gave me pause, but I reasoned that big companies often ask for such details in advance, especially for positions that required background checks. So I filled out the form, attached my resume, and sent it back without much thought. A few days passed, and I heard nothing. No follow-up email, no confirmation of receipt, nothing. I started to get a little nervous, but I figured these things take time. Then, about a week later, strange things started happening. I received a notification from my bank alerting me to suspicious activity on my account. Someone had tried to withdraw a large sum of money, but thankfully the bank flagged it as fraudulent and blocked the transaction. Panicked, I logged into my account and found several unauthorized attempts to access my banking details. I immediately contacted my bank, canceled my cards, and changed all my passwords. But it didn't stop there. I started receiving emails about loans and credit cards I hadn't applied for, with confirmation emails saying my applications had been approved. There were credit checks done in my name, and I was being bombarded with inquiries from companies I had never dealt with before. It didn't take long to figure out what had happened. The job offer had been a scam. The form I had filled out, the one asking for my personal details and social security number, hadn't been from the company at all. Someone had spoofed their email, creating a fake but convincing job offer, all designed to steal my identity. I felt sick. I immediately contacted the company, explaining what had happened. They confirmed that they had no record of the job offer or any email correspondence with me. I had fallen for an elaborate phishing scheme, one that had been perfectly crafted to target job seekers like me. I went into full damage control mode. I froze my credit, reported the identity theft to the authorities, and contacted every agency I could think of to secure my personal information. But the fallout was overwhelming. For weeks, I was dealing with the aftermath, canceling accounts, fighting fraudulent charges, and trying to undo the damage that had been done. The worst part was that I had been so careful up until that point. I had read countless articles about online scams, and I knew better than to click on suspicious links or provide personal information to unverified sources. But this one had slipped through the cracks. It had been so well executed, so meticulously designed, that it fooled even someone who thought they were too savvy to fall for a scam. The experience left me feeling violated, like my entire identity had been stolen and sold to the highest bidder. I no longer trusted job offers that came through email, no matter how legitimate they looked. Every time I saw a new opportunity, I felt a surge of anxiety, questioning whether it was real or just another trap waiting to catch me off guard. In the end, I managed to get most of the fraudulent activity sorted out, but the scars remained. I had to rebuild my credit, change my online security protocols, and learn to second-guess every email, every attachment, every opportunity that landed in my inbox. Because once someone has stolen your identity, your name, your personal details, your financial security, it's hard to ever feel safe again. Trust becomes a fragile thing, easily broken and difficult to repair. Story 2. It was supposed to be a quick stop. I had some errands to run, and afterward, I decided to stop at a nearby cafe to catch up on emails and finish a bit of work. The place was cozy, with just enough background noise to make it feel comfortable. I ordered a coffee, found a small table near the window, and pulled out my laptop. Like most cafes, this one offered free public Wi-Fi. I connected without thinking much of it. It was something I did all the time. The little lock icon appeared next to the Wi-Fi signal, reassuring me that the connection was secure. I dove into my emails, replying to a few clients and catching up on the day's tasks. After about an hour, I noticed something strange. My laptop started running slower than usual. Web pages took longer to load, and my email program froze for a moment before it started working again. I chalked it up to the public Wi-Fi being overloaded, figuring other customers were probably streaming videos or downloading files. It wasn't a big deal, so I kept working. But then an alert popped up on my screen. It was a security notification warning me that an unfamiliar device had attempted to access my laptop's files. I froze. I hadn't clicked on any suspicious links or downloaded anything. What was going on? I disconnected from the Wi-Fi immediately, my heart racing. I opened my security settings and ran a quick scan, but nothing came up. Everything looked normal, but that didn't make me feel any better. Someone had tried to get into my laptop. Right here, in this cafe. I packed up quickly and left, still feeling uneasy about the whole thing. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary for the rest of the day, so I convinced myself it was a random glitch, or maybe just the Wi-Fi network acting up. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, things took a darker turn. I was sitting at my desk, working on a project, when I noticed an unfamiliar folder on my desktop. I hadn't created it, and the name didn't look like anything I recognized. I clicked on it, curious but cautious, and my blood ran cold when I saw what was inside. The folder was full of files, screenshots, documents, and personal photos. But these weren't just any files. They were mine. They were screenshots of my email inbox, documents I had worked on over the past few days, and even personal photos stored in folders I hadn't accessed in weeks. Someone had been watching me. Someone had accessed my laptop during that brief moment when I was connected to the cafe's Wi-Fi. I felt sick. The files in the folder were copied versions of things I had assumed were private, things I hadn't shared with anyone. I immediately disconnected my laptop from the internet, unsure of what to do next. I stared at the screen, a mix of fear and disbelief washing over me. How had this happened? I had security software, firewalls, everything that should have protected me from this kind of intrusion. But somehow, someone had broken through. I spent the next few hours going into damage control mode. I backed up my important files, wiped my laptop clean, and reinstalled everything from scratch. I changed every password, logged out of every account, and enabled two-factor authentication wherever I could. But no matter how many precautions I took, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching, still lurking in the background. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. I received password reset emails for accounts I hadn't touched in months. Notifications popped up, warning me of failed login attempts from locations I had never been. It was clear that whoever had accessed my laptop wasn't done. They were still trying to get in, still probing for weaknesses. I contacted a cybersecurity expert, desperate for help. They examined my laptop, checking for malware, spyware, or any trace of how the hacker had gotten in. After a thorough investigation, they confirmed my worst fear: someone had used the public Wi-Fi network at the cafe to intercept my connection, gaining access to my files and data without me even realizing it. The expert explained that public Wi-Fi networks, even those that appear secure, can be incredibly vulnerable to attacks. Hackers can set up fake networks that look legitimate, or they can exploit weaknesses in poorly secured connections to access personal devices. I had been careful, or so I thought, but it hadn't been enough. My personal information, files, emails, photos had been exposed to a stranger who now had the power to use it however they wanted. The expert helped me secure my laptop, encrypting my files and setting up a VPN for any future connections. But the damage had already been done. I didn't know who had accessed my data or what they intended to do with it. Weeks passed, and while the hacking attempts eventually stopped, the fear remained. Every time I connected to the internet, I felt a twinge of anxiety. Even though I had taken all the necessary precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone could be watching, lurking in the background, waiting for their next opportunity. I haven't used public Wi-Fi since, because once someone has exploited your most personal information, your files, your photos, your conversations, it's hard to ever trust a network or your own device again. Story 3. It was a typical Friday evening, and I was relaxing on the couch after a long week. I had just settled in with a movie when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a notification: verification code 328195. If this wasn't you, please ignore this message. I frowned. I hadn't requested any verification codes. Maybe it was one of those phishing scams, so I ignored it and went back to the movie. But minutes later, another notification appeared, this time from a different service. Another verification code, then another and another. Each message came from a different platform: banking, social media, even an app I hadn't used in months. By now I was concerned. Someone was trying to access my accounts. I quickly grabbed my laptop, opened my email, and started checking for any suspicious activity. Sure enough, there were multiple alerts about failed login attempts from locations I didn't recognize. Panic set in. Whoever was trying to get into my accounts was relentless. I changed all of my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication where I hadn't already, and set up additional security measures. I felt a little better afterward, but the sheer volume of attempts had shaken me. Why was someone targeting me, and how did they get so close to breaking in? Just as I was about to turn my phone off for the night, it rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. There was a brief pause before a voice, muffled and distorted, spoke on the other end. "Are you enjoying your new phone?" I froze. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that I have your phone now." My heart raced. "What are you talking about?" "I have my phone." Not for long, the voice said smoothly, You see, you're not the only one using it." I quickly hung up, my hands shaking. What did they mean, not the only one using it? I stared at my phone, suddenly afraid to touch it. It was still in my hand, still showing my home screen, but now it felt foreign. Was it possible that someone had somehow gained control of it, even while I was using it? I rushed to my settings and checked for anything unusual, apps I didn't recognize, connections I hadn't made. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I shut the phone off completely and spent the rest of the night pacing, wondering what to do next. The next morning, I went to my phone carrier, hoping they could help. I explained what had happened, and they ran diagnostics on the device, checking for malware or signs of tampering. After a long wait, the technician came back, shaking his head. "Your phone looks clean," he said. "No signs of hacking, no unauthorized access. But it's good that you're being cautious. Just keep an eye on it." I left feeling frustrated. I knew something was wrong, but no one could find anything. That night, I turned my phone back on, cautiously waiting for any signs of strange activity. Nothing happened, and for a brief moment I thought maybe it had been a prank or a coincidence. But then the messages started again. This time they weren't just verification codes. I started receiving texts from unknown numbers, each one more cryptic than the last. "Nice dinner tonight. That restaurant is one of my favorites. I see you took the long way home. Smart move." Each message referenced something I had done that day, places I had been, routes I had taken. My blood ran cold as I realized that whoever was sending these texts wasn't just guessing. They were watching me. I called the police, explaining the situation, but they were limited in what they could do. They advised me to keep my phone off, monitor my accounts, and report any further suspicious activity. It wasn't the reassurance I had hoped for, but I had no choice but to follow their advice. For the next week, I kept my phone turned off as much as possible, using it only when absolutely necessary. But the texts kept coming. Somehow, the person behind them knew where I was, even without my phone being on. The final straw came one evening when I received a message that simply read, "Look outside." I hesitated, fear creeping into my chest, but I forced myself to walk over to the window. I pulled back the curtain, scanning the street below. It was dark, the street lights casting long shadows, but at first I didn't see anything unusual. Then I noticed a figure standing just across the road, barely visible in the shadows. They were holding something in their hand, a small, glowing screen, a phone. They raised their hand, as if to wave, and then turned and disappeared into the darkness. I immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. I gave them everything I had, the texts, the calls, the strange messages, but once again, they told me it would be difficult to trace. Whoever was doing this was careful, using disposable numbers and masking their location. I switched phones the next day, hoping that a fresh start would give me some peace. But the experience left me rattled. Every time I get a message or a call from an unknown number, my heart skips a beat, and I wonder if it's them, still watching, still using my phone. Because once someone has made you doubt the device you carry with you every day, it's impossible to ever trust it again. They raised their hand, as if to wave, and then turned and disappeared into the darkness. I immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. I gave them everything I had, the texts, the calls, the strange messages, but once again, they told me it would be difficult to trace. Whoever was doing this was careful, using disposable numbers and masking their location. I switched phones the next day, hoping that a fresh start would give me some peace. but the experience left me rattled. Every time I get a message or a call from an unknown number, my heart skips a beat, and I wonder if it's them, still watching, still using my phone. Because once someone has made you doubt the device you carry with you every day, it's impossible to ever trust it again. Story 4. It all started with a phone call. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I quickly glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, so I silenced it and figured I'd check later. But a few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Same number. I ignored it once more, but then a text message popped up, "Why did you cancel our meeting?" I frowned, confusion settling in. I didn't have any meetings scheduled outside of the one I was already in. I decided to wait until the meeting was over before addressing it, but the moment I stepped out, my phone rang again. This time I answered. "Hey, I'm standing outside the cafe. Are you still coming?" the voice on the other end asked. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number," I said politely. The voice paused for a moment, then said, "This is my full name, right? We were supposed to meet today." My stomach dropped. How did this stranger know my name? I had never made any plans to meet anyone at a cafe. "I don't know who you are," I replied, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. "I think there's been a mistake." The person sighed in frustration. "You emailed me, confirmed everything this morning. Why are you pretending like this didn't happen?" I hung up, my heart racing. Something was very wrong. Over the next few hours, my phone kept buzzing calls, texts, even emails from people I didn't know. They all claimed I had reached out to them, arranged meetings, or sent messages. Some were polite, others were angry, accusing me of wasting their time or playing some kind of prank. Panic set in. I hadn't contacted any of these people. Someone was pretending to be me. I logged into my email and started digging through the messages. There were dozens of emails, all from an address that looked eerily similar to mine one letter off, something you wouldn't notice unless you looked closely. The emails were written in a way that mimicked my style, casual but professional, as if the person knew exactly how I communicated. They were reaching out to people, arranging meetings, offering freelance work, and even asking for personal details. Some emails contained links that I suspected were phishing attempts, trying to extract sensitive information from unsuspecting recipients. And all of it was being done under my name. I felt sick. Someone had taken my identity and was using it to manipulate others. And worse, it wasn't just my email they were impersonating, they had created social media profiles too. I discovered fake accounts on several platforms, all using my pictures, my posts, even my exact bio. It was as if someone had studied my online presence and recreated it, down to the smallest detail. I immediately reported the fake accounts and contacted the platforms, but it felt like trying to put out a fire with a cup of water. For every account I reported, another one would pop up. The impersonator was relentless, targeting people in my professional network, my friends, even family members. It wasn't long before the impersonator started reaching out to my actual contacts. People I knew personally began receiving strange emails and messages from me. Some were confused, others were concerned. I had to explain over and over again that it wasn't me, that someone was pretending to be me. But the damage was done. My reputation was being dragged through the mud, and there was little I could do to stop it. The impersonator was clever, constantly changing tactics and creating new accounts. Even when I thought I had shut them down, they'd resurface, more aggressive than before. Then things escalated. One morning, I received a frantic message from a close friend. "Why are you asking me for money?" I stared at the screen, horrified. The impersonator had reached out to my friend, pretending to be me, claiming I was in trouble and needed a loan. It was the classic scam, but with a terrifying twist. They had personalized it, using details from my life, my conversations, my relationship with my friend, to make it seem real. Thankfully, my friend had the presence of mind to contact me directly instead of falling for the scam. But that was the tipping point. The impersonator wasn't just playing games anymore. They were actively trying to harm me and the people around me. I contacted the police, filing a report and providing all the evidence I had gathered. They took my case seriously, but like many cases of online identity theft, it was difficult to track down the perpetrator. The impersonator was using burner accounts, temporary emails, and VPNs to hide their tracks. I also hired a cybersecurity expert, someone who specialized in digital forensics. They combed through my online accounts, tightened my security, and tried to trace the source of the impersonator's attacks. But even they admitted it would be nearly impossible to fully stop the impersonator without more concrete evidence. Weeks passed, and slowly the attacks began to taper off. The fake accounts were taken down, and the messages stopped. I never found out who was behind it, or why they had targeted me in the first place. It could have been a random cyber criminal, or maybe someone I knew. The anonymity of the internet made it impossible to know for sure. But the experience left a lasting scar. My sense of security was shattered. Every time I sent an email or posted something online, I worried that someone could be watching, waiting to use my information against me. I became paranoid about my digital presence, constantly checking for signs of impersonation, afraid that it could happen again. Because once someone has stolen your identity, even if only in the digital world, it's hard to ever feel like it truly belongs to you again. Story 5. It was a typical weekday afternoon, and I was working from home, lost in a series of emails and tasks. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my focus. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, but these days, with online shopping, packages seemed to arrive at random times. I walked over to the door and checked through the peephole. There was a delivery man standing outside, holding a medium-sized box. I opened the door cautiously. "Package for you," he said with a friendly smile. I took the box and signed for it, though I couldn't remember ordering anything. It had my name and address on the label, but the sender's details were unclear, just a generic company name I didn't recognize. I brought the package inside and set it on the kitchen counter, eyeing it suspiciously. The box was taped up securely, but it wasn't very heavy. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to open it. I grabbed a pair of scissors, sliced through the tape, and lifted the lid. Inside was something I didn't expect: a single manila envelope, unmarked and sealed. No paperwork, no explanation, just the envelope. Confused, I opened it and pulled out a stack of papers. At first glance, they looked like standard documents: printed emails, meeting notes, even copies of text messages. But as I skimmed through them, my heart started to race. They were all about me. My name was all over the documents, and they referenced places I had been, people I had talked to, and events in my life that were personal, some that were only a few days old. It was as if someone had been tracking my movements, logging everything I did, and documenting my conversations. The level of detail was unnerving. One page even had a timestamp from a lunch I'd had with a friend just the week before. There was no way this information could be public. It wasn't on my social media, and I hadn't shared it with anyone outside of that specific moment. Whoever had sent the package knew things they shouldn't. It felt like a violation, a breach of privacy on a level I couldn't quite comprehend. My hands trembled as I flipped through the stack of papers, trying to make sense of it all. At the bottom of the pile, there was a note. It was typed, short, and to the point you're not as hard to track as you think. I dropped the papers, a cold feeling washing over me. Someone had been following me, watching me, gathering information, and now they were letting me know just how easy it was. I looked around my apartment, suddenly feeling exposed. Were there cameras? Bugs? How had they gotten all this information? I immediately called the police. They sent an officer over to check the package, and I handed over everything: documents, the box, the envelope. The officer took it seriously, asking if I'd noticed anyone suspicious lately, or if I'd received any strange messages. But I hadn't. Everything in my life had seemed normal until that moment. They opened an investigation, though they warned me it might be difficult to track down who had sent the package. The delivery service had been legitimate, but tracing the original sender wasn't so straightforward. The company name on the label was a shell, a common tactic used to disguise where a package had really come from. I spent the next few days in a haze of paranoia. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, scoured my apartment for any hidden devices, and even installed new security cameras. But no matter how many precautions I took, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching, still tracking me. A week passed with no new developments. I tried to go back to my normal routine, though every time I stepped outside, I felt like there were eyes on me. I changed my routes, avoided places I usually frequented, and kept my phone off as much as possible. But the unease never went away. Then, one evening, just as I was beginning to think the whole ordeal was over, I received a phone call. The number was blocked. I hesitated but answered it. A distorted voice greeted me on the other end. "Did you get my package?" My heart pounded in my chest. "Who is this?" I demanded, but the voice just chuckled. "You should be more careful. The world isn't as private as you think it is." Then the line went dead. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, shaken to my core. The package had been a message someone was letting me know that they had access to my life, my routines, my conversations, and they could watch me whenever they wanted. I reported the call to the police, but there was little they could do with a blocked number and no other leads. The trail was cold, and whoever was behind it had covered their tracks well. I never received another package, and the calls stopped after that one night, but the fear lingered. To this day, I don't know who sent the package or why. Maybe it was a hacker, a stalker, or someone who had a personal vendetta against me. But the experience left me paranoid, constantly questioning how secure my life really was. I became hyper-aware of every step I took, every piece of information I shared, every detail of my day-to-day life. Because once someone has shown you just how easily they can track your every move, it's impossible to ever feel truly invisible again. Story 17. It started innocently enough, a simple invitation to a group chat. I received a message from an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in years but vaguely remembered from a college course we had both taken. The message was casual, suggesting I join a small online group they were part of, where they discussed books, shared recommendations, and generally kept in touch with like-minded people. At first, I didn't think much of it. I enjoyed reading, and it seemed like a harmless way to reconnect. So I accepted the invitation and joined the group chat. There were about a dozen other members, most of whom I didn't know, but they all seemed friendly and welcoming. The conversations were lively, and the book recommendations were interesting. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But after a few days, the tone of the group started to shift. At first, it was subtle, Members began discussing more personal topics, nothing too strange, just the usual chatter about work, relationships, and hobbies. But then, some of the conversations started to get uncomfortably detailed. People were sharing intimate stories, personal secrets, things you wouldn't typically tell strangers. It felt a little too open, like everyone was trying to outdo each other with how much they could reveal. I didn't participate much in those discussions, keeping my contributions light and casual. But one evening I noticed something strange. One of the members posted a comment that was directed at me, but it mentioned something very specific, a conversation I had had in private with a friend just a few days earlier. It wasn't something I had shared with anyone online, and certainly not with the group. My chest tightened as I read it, trying to figure out how they could have known. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just a coincidence. Maybe I had mentioned something similar in passing and I had forgotten. But then it happened again. Another comment, this time referencing a place I had visited that week, one that wasn't on social media, and something I hadn't told anyone about. Someone in the group was somehow aware of things they shouldn't have been. I started paying closer attention to the conversations in the chat, reading between the lines. The more I watched, the more uneasy I became. It wasn't just idle chatter anymore, there was a strange intensity to the way people shared their lives, almost as if they were being watched and judged for how much they revealed. One night, a new message popped up in the chat. It was from a member I hadn't seen before, someone who had been lurking in the background but rarely participated. The message was cryptic, a single sentence that made my stomach drop, "We know more than you think." My pulse quickened as I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. Before I could type anything, more messages followed, this time from multiple members. They started referencing details about my life that I hadn't shared, places I had been, conversations I had had, things only people close to me would know. I immediately left the chat, closed the app, and sat in silence for a moment, my mind racing. Who were these people? How did they know so much about me? My first thought was that my phone or computer had been hacked, that somehow they were accessing my personal information. I spent the rest of the night combing through my devices, checking for spyware or malware, but I found nothing. The next day, I received a message from the acquaintance who had originally invited me to the group. It was short, but the words sent a chill down my spine. "You shouldn't have left the group. We were just getting started." I blocked their number, deleted the app, and tried to put the whole experience behind me. But the fear lingered. Every time I logged onto my computer or phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, monitoring my activity. The idea that a group of strangers had access to my private life and were using it for their own twisted game haunted me. A few days later, another message appeared, this time in my email. It was from an anonymous address, but the subject line read, "We're still watching." I didn't open the email. I didn't need to. The message was clear, they weren't done with me. I contacted the police, showing them the messages and explaining what had happened. They took my report seriously, but like many cases of online harassment, it was difficult to track down the people involved. The group had operated under fake names and encrypted messaging platforms, making it nearly impossible to identify who was behind it. For weeks, I lived in a state of paranoia, constantly looking over my shoulder, questioning everyone around me. The group had faded into the background, but the fear they had instilled remained. I never found out who they were or how they had gained access to my life. But their parting message was one I couldn't forget: "We know more than you think." Even now, I'm cautious about joining any online groups or engaging in social media. The experience left me with a deep sense of vulnerability, The realization that even the most innocent interactions can open the door to something far more sinister. Once you've been pulled into someone else's game, it's hard to ever feel safe again. Story 7. It was just another day at the office, emails, meetings, deadlines. The usual grind. I was working on a report when a notification popped up on my computer screen, new email. The subject line read, "Are you coming to the meeting?" It looked like an ordinary work-related email, so I clicked on it without a second thought. But as I scrolled through the message, confusion set in. The email wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even about anything I was involved in. It mentioned names I didn't recognize, referred to projects I had never heard of, and talked about details that didn't match anything from my job. The oddest part, it was sent from my own email address. I stared at the screen for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. How could an email be sent from my account without my knowledge? Had I been hacked? I immediately checked my sent folder, but there was nothing there. My email account showed no record of the message being sent. I brushed it off as a glitch, maybe an accidental copy and paste error or a forwarding mistake from one of the systems at work. Still, I changed my password just to be safe and got back to my day. But the next morning it happened again. Another email, again from my own address, showed up in my inbox. This time, the subject line was stranger about last night. My heart skipped a beat as I clicked it open. The email was short and cryptic. "I hope you had a good time. Let's keep this between us." It was unsettling, to say the least. There was no context, no signature, no clue as to who had written it or why it had been sent from my account. I checked the sent folder again. Nothing. That's when I started to panic. Over the next few days, more emails appeared, each one weirder than the last. One referenced a meeting I had never attended. Another included personal details, things that only a few close friends would know. It was as if someone was sending these emails to me from my own account, pulling information from my life and twisting it into something unrecognizable. I contacted it, explaining what had been happening. They ran diagnostics on my computer, checked for malware, and even reset my account credentials. But they couldn't find anything wrong. Everything appeared normal from their end. Yet the emails kept coming. One morning I received an email with an attachment. The subject line was, "This is just the beginning." My hands trembled as I opened the file, expecting the worst. It was a photograph of me, taken from the window of a cafe often visited. The angle was perfect, the timing precise. I hadn't seen anyone that day, hadn't noticed anyone watching me. Yet here was proof that someone had been. My mind raced. Who was doing this? And why? How had they gotten access to my email, my life, without leaving a trace? The email didn't give any answers, only a single line at the end of the message, "You're always being watched." I went back to it, practically begging them to dig deeper. They combed through everything, firewalls, logs, user activity, but found nothing unusual. According to their systems, no one else had accessed my account. It was as if the emails didn't exist, but they did. They existed for me. The next email was the worst. It was titled "Tonight," and it contained a list of places I had been over the past week. Every coffee shop, every store, even a quiet walk I had taken alone in the park. The level of detail was terrifying. Whoever was behind this knew my routine, knew where I went and when I went there. They were watching me, tracking my every move. I went to the police, bringing them the emails and the photograph. They took my case seriously, but warned me that cyberstalking cases were notoriously difficult to crack. They promised to investigate, but I could tell from their tone that they didn't expect to find much. I started changing my routines, taking different routes to work, avoiding places I usually went, keeping my phone off whenever possible. I even stopped checking my email, terrified of what I might find. But the fear followed me everywhere. I felt like I was living under a microscope. Every part of my life laid bare for someone else's amusement. After weeks of silence, the emails suddenly stopped. No explanation, no resolution, just an eerie, empty inbox. It should have been a relief, but the quiet felt more ominous than the messages themselves. The police never found the person responsible, and my A-team couldn't figure out how my account had been used without leaving any trace. To this day, I don't know who was behind the emails or how they managed to pull off such a precise invasion of my privacy. I've since switched jobs, moved to a new city, and started over with new accounts. But even now, every time I get a new email notification, I feel a twinge of anxiety. Because once someone has hacked into your life, into your mind, it's impossible to ever feel truly secure again. Story 8. It started off as a convenience, something I barely even noticed after a while. The smart speaker, with its sleek design and soft voice, had become a staple in my apartment. I used it for everything: setting timers, playing music, checking the weather. I even used it to control the lights and thermostat. It was part of my daily routine, a helpful little assistant that made life easier. But then it started acting strange. One night while I was watching TV, the speaker lit up. The ring of blue light spun lazily, as if it was about to respond to a command. I glanced over, confused. I hadn't said anything. The speaker stayed lit for a few moments, then dimmed, going back to sleep. I brushed it off as a glitch. Maybe it had picked up some background noise from the TV or a stray sound from outside. But over the next few days, it happened again. The speaker would randomly wake up, listening, as if waiting for a command that never came. Sometimes it would light up in the middle of the night, casting an eerie glow across my bedroom, the soft hum of technology filling the silence. I started to feel uneasy. Maybe it was just a malfunction, but the frequency of the wake-ups was increasing. It seemed to happen when I least expected it, when I was alone and the house was quiet. I began to wonder if the speaker was listening to more than just my commands. Then one day, it responded to a conversation I hadn't asked it to join. I was on the phone with a friend, chatting about our weekend plans, when the speaker suddenly interrupted. Its voice, usually calm and neutral, startled me as it said, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Could you repeat the request?" I froze. My friend went quiet on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I hadn't addressed the speaker, hadn't even been talking about anything remotely related to it. Yet there it was, chiming in as if it were part of the conversation. I hung up the phone, staring at the speaker. Was it listening all the time? Was it picking up more than just my voice commands? I tried to shake off the paranoia, telling myself it was just a glitch. That technology wasn't perfect. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. What if it wasn't a glitch? What if the speaker was recording everything, not just the commands I gave it, but my private conversations too? I went online, searching for answers. There were stories scattered across forums and news articles of people who had experienced similar issues: smart speakers responding without being prompted, recording conversations, even sending private messages to other devices. It wasn't just a rare glitch. It was happening to more people than I realized. I decided to check the speaker settings. I opened the app on my phone and started combing through the voice logs. My heart raced as I scrolled past recordings of my commands, playlists, timers, weather requests, and then stopped cold when I found recordings I didn't recognize. There were logs of me talking to friends, me talking to myself, me going about my day. The speaker had been recording me, not just when I asked it to, but whenever it felt like it. Conversations I had never intended it to hear were saved in the app, stored like data waiting to be processed. I felt sick. My privacy had been violated in the one place I thought I was safe. I immediately turned off the speaker, unplugging it from the wall and throwing it into a drawer. But the damage was done. How long had it been listening? How much had it recorded? I contacted the company support team, demanding answers. They were apologetic, explaining that the speaker only recorded snippets to improve its functionality, and that those recordings could be deleted. But that wasn't good enough. The thought that my private conversations had been stored, even temporarily, was terrifying. I deleted the logs, wiped the speaker's memory, and canceled my account. I couldn't bring myself to trust the device anymore. Even after it was unplugged and out of sight, I felt like it was still there, lurking, waiting to listen in again. But the worst part was that it made me question everything. If a device I had willingly brought into my home could betray my trust so easily, what else was listening? My phone? My laptop? The camera on my computer? The line between convenience and surveillance had blurred, and I no longer knew where to draw it. Technology had made my life easier, but it had also made me vulnerable. The assistant I had once relied on now felt like a spy, always watching, always listening. Even now, I'm cautious about what I say when I'm alone. I no longer trust the silence, no longer assume that my words are private. Because once you realize that the devices in your home can turn against you, it's hard to ever feel alone again. Story 9. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I was sitting on my balcony with a cup of coffee, enjoying the sunshine and the gentle breeze. My apartment building was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, where everyone minded their own business. It was one of the reasons I loved living there, peaceful, private, and far removed from the hustle and bustle of the city. But that day, something felt different. As I sipped my coffee and flipped through a magazine, I noticed a faint buzzing sound. At first, I thought it was a large insect, maybe a wasp or a bee, but when I looked up, I saw it. A drone, hovering just a few feet away, its tiny propellers whirring in the air. It wasn't the first time I had seen drones flying around the neighborhood. Some of the kids liked to play with them in the park, but this one was different. It was close, too close. And it wasn't just passing by. It was lingering. I put down my coffee and stared at it, my unease growing. The drone hovered there for what felt like minutes, its camera pointed directly at me. I stood up, waving my hands to shoo it away, but it didn't move. It just stayed there, hovering in place, as if it were watching me. After a few moments, it finally flew off, zipping away toward one of the buildings down the street. I tried to brush it off as a harmless curiosity, maybe someone playing with their new gadget and getting too close for comfort. But the encounter left me feeling unsettled. It was too deliberate, too invasive. The next day, it happened again. This time, I was in my living room, sitting by the window, when I heard the familiar buzzing. I looked outside, and there it was. The same drone, hovering just outside my window. My stomach tightened as I realized it wasn't an accident. Someone was intentionally flying the drone near my apartment, watching me. I closed the curtains, my heart racing. Who would do something like this? Was it a neighbor? A random stranger? The idea that someone was using a drone to spy on me made my skin crawl. The drone visits became more frequent. Sometimes it would appear in the morning as I was getting ready for work, hovering near my bathroom window. Other times it would show up in the evening, buzzing just outside my balcony as I tried to relax after a long day. Every time I saw it, the same feeling of violation swept over me. My apartment, my private space, no longer felt safe. I started watching the skies every time I went outside, scanning for the drone. I began closing my curtains during the day, keeping my windows shut, afraid that whoever was flying it might be watching me even when I thought I was alone. I became paranoid, constantly on edge, wondering when it would appear next. I decided to confront the building's management, asking if they knew anything about the drone. They were sympathetic but unhelpful. Drones were legal, they said, and unless it was causing harm or damage, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I report it to the police if I felt threatened. And that's exactly what I did. The officer I spoke to took my concerns seriously, but like the building management, he explained that it was difficult to track down the owner of a drone. Unless I had proof of who was flying it or could show that it was being used to violate my privacy, there wasn't much they could do. I felt helpless. The drone continued to appear, always hovering just out of reach, watching from a distance. Whoever was controlling it was careful, never letting it linger long enough for me to get a good look at where it was coming from. But I knew it had to be someone nearby. Drones didn't have unlimited range, and the precision with which it flew suggested that the operator was close. One evening, after yet another drone sighting, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I bought a pair of binoculars and started watching the skies, hoping to catch a glimpse of where the drone was heading. After several attempts, I finally saw it flying back toward one of the houses down the street, disappearing behind a row of trees. I did some digging and found out that the house belonged to a man named Robert. He was quiet, kept to himself, and I had only ever seen him in passing. He didn't seem like the type to fly a drone around the neighborhood, but appearances could be deceiving. I reported my findings to the police, and they agreed to investigate. A few days later, I received a call from the officer. They had spoken to Robert, who admitted to owning the drone but denied using it to spy on me. He claimed he was just practicing his flying skills and hadn't meant to invade my privacy. The police issued him a warning, advising him to keep the drone away from residential areas. But that didn't ease my mind. Even if Robert hadn't meant any harm, the experience had left me shaken. The idea that someone could so easily use technology to invade my personal space had made me paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder. The drone sighting stopped after that, but the damage was done. My apartment no longer felt like the safe haven it had once been. Every time I stepped onto my balcony or opened a window, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be watching. It's strange how something as small as a drone can make you feel so exposed, so vulnerable. In a world where technology is everywhere, it's easy to forget how quickly it can be turned against you. And once that line between public and private is crossed, it's hard to ever feel secure again. Story 10. I had always been careful about my online presence. Like most people, I shared some aspects of my life on social media, vacation pictures, funny moments with friends, the occasional opinion on a movie or book. But I was mindful of my privacy settings, making sure that only people I knew could see what I posted, or so I thought. It all started when a friend messaged me out of the blue, asking if I had created a new Instagram account. Confused, I told her no, but she sent me a link to the profile anyway. My stomach tightened as I clicked it. There was a profile with my name, my pictures, my life. But it wasn't me. Whoever had created the account had stolen my photos, some of which I had posted years ago, and crafted a fake version of my life. The posts looked eerily familiar, as if someone had been mirroring my online presence, but twisting it into something darker. The captions were strange, two oddly personal comments, as if they were written by someone who knew me well. My initial reaction was disbelief. Who would go through the trouble of making a fake profile of me, and why? But as I scrolled through the posts, I realized just how meticulously they had been crafted. The person behind the profile hadn't just stolen my pictures, they had created a life for me, one that I didn't recognize. They posted pictures of places I had never been, with people I didn't know, tagging locations I had never visited. They were creating a parallel version of my life, one that existed only in this strange, false reality. I immediately reported the profile to Instagram, explaining that it was an impersonation and demanding that it be taken down. My friends and family did the same, but the platform's response was slow. Days passed, and the fake profile was still there, gathering likes and followers. Worse, it was interacting with people, commenting on posts, sending messages to friends and acquaintances. Whoever was behind it was pretending to be me in every way. I started receiving confused messages from people who had been contacted by the fake account. Some thought it was a joke, others were concerned. But then the fake profile took things a step further. They began posting personal information, details that I had never shared online. Addresses of places I'd lived in the past, names of family members, old job titles, even the name of my childhood pet. Things that only someone who knew me closely could have known. I felt a wave of dread. This wasn't just some prank. Whoever was behind this knew things about me, things that weren't available on my public social media, and they were using that information to fuel this disturbing impersonation. I contacted Instagram again, this time with a sense of urgency, but once again the process was slow. Meanwhile, the fake profile continued to post, to comment, to send messages. It was like watching someone else live my life, a distorted, nightmarish version of it. Things escalated when the fake account started reaching out to my coworkers and professional contacts. They messaged people I worked with, claiming to be me, making strange, unprofessional comments, even asking for personal favors. My heart sank as I realized that this was no longer just an online issue, it was bleeding into my real life, threatening my reputation and my relationships. I tried to do damage control, reaching out to people personally to explain the situation, but it was exhausting. For every person I managed to contact, there were others who might have seen the messages and never said anything. I had no way of knowing who had been affected. Finally, after weeks of back and forth with Instagram's support team, the fake profile was taken down. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Just days later, another fake profile popped up, this time using slightly different photos and a variation of my name. It was like playing a game of whack-a-mole. No matter how many times I reported the profiles, they kept coming back, each one more unsettling than the last. The police were little help. They took my report seriously but admitted that tracking down the person behind an anonymous social media account was nearly impossible. It could be anyone, a stranger, an acquaintance, even someone I knew personally. The anonymity of the internet made it easy for them to hide. The experience left me paranoid. I stopped posting on social media altogether, locking down my accounts even further and removing old posts. I began to wonder who in my life could have been behind the fake profiles. Was it someone from my past? A coworker? A neighbor? The not knowing was the worst part. Whoever it was, they had succeeded in making me feel completely exposed, as if every part of my life was up for grabs. Even though the profiles were eventually taken down, the damage was done. My trust in social media and in the people around me was shattered. I no longer felt like I could control my own identity, online or offline. Every time I logged onto a platform, I half expected to see another fake profile, another distorted version of myself staring back at me. Because once someone has stolen your identity, even for a moment, it's hard to ever feel like you fully own it again. Story 11. The apartment was my sanctuary, a small but comfortable space where I could escape from the world. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I always felt safe there. I'd lived in the building for a little over a year, and though I kept mostly to myself, I'd made casual acquaintances with my neighbors, a nod here, a friendly wave there. Nothing too personal. That sense of safety shattered the day I found the camera. It was an ordinary evening. I had just come home from work, tired but relieved to be back in the comfort of my space. I started to unwind, made myself a cup of tea, kicked off my shoes, and decided to settle in for a quiet night of reading. But as I reached for the lamp on my bedside table, I noticed something strange. There behind the lamp, tucked into the corner where the wall met the nightstand, was a small black device. At first glance, it looked like a USB charger or some other innocuous gadget, but something about it didn't seem right. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, and my heart sank as I realized what it was: a camera. Tiny, almost unnoticeable, but unmistakable. It had been carefully placed, angled to capture the entire room. My bedroom. My mind raced. How long had it been there? Who had put it there? I searched the rest of the room, frantically checking every corner, every piece of furniture. Then I moved to the other rooms in the apartment, scouring the living room, the kitchen, even the bathroom. But I found nothing else. Just the one camera, hidden in my most private space. I couldn't stop the nausea that rose in my throat. Someone had been watching me, in my bedroom, a place where I was supposed to feel safe, where I was at my most vulnerable. The thought made my skin crawl. I immediately called the police, barely able to keep my voice steady as I explained what I had found. They sent an officer to my apartment, and I handed over the camera, shaking as I recounted the discovery. He took it seriously, assuring me that they would launch an investigation, but there were no guarantees. Finding out who had placed the camera would be difficult, especially if it had been done by someone with access to the building. I called my landlord the next day, demanding to know how this could have happened. He was as shocked as I was, insisting that the building's security was solid and that only maintenance staff had access to the apartments. He promised to cooperate with the police, but it did little to ease my mind. Someone had breached that security. Someone had invaded my space. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the apartment sent my heart racing. Every shadow made me jump. I kept imagining that there were more cameras, hidden where I hadn't thought to look. I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. The police questioned the building staff, but no one admitted to knowing anything about the camera. The investigation turned up no leads, no fingerprints, no identifiable information from the device itself. Whoever had placed it had been careful, leaving no trace behind. I installed new locks on my doors, added security cameras of my own, and even considered moving out altogether. But the reality was, no matter where I went, the damage had been done. I would never feel safe again in the way I had before. A few weeks later, just when I thought things had started to settle down, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, and inside was a USB drive. My hands shook as I plugged it into my computer, dread pooling in my stomach. The files on the drive were videos of me, in my bedroom, sitting on my bed, changing clothes, sleeping. Every private moment I thought had been mine alone was there, captured from that hidden camera's angle. The footage dated back weeks, maybe even months. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just some random invasion of privacy. Someone had been watching me for a long time, recording me, and now they were taunting me with the proof. I rushed to the police again, handing over the USB drive, but once again the investigation hit a dead end. There were no clues as to who had sent it, no way to trace it back to the person responsible. I was left with nothing but fear and a gnawing sense of violation. I changed everything: new locks, new security system, even a new apartment. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The paranoia followed me, lingering in every room, every quiet moment. To this day, I don't know who did it. I don't know how long they were watching or why they chose me. All I know is that the sense of security I once had in my home is gone, replaced by a constant, unshakable fear. Because when someone turns your sanctuary into a place of surveillance, you realize that privacy is something that can be stolen, piece by piece, without you ever knowing it's gone. Story 12. I had always been careful about what I shared online. Like most people, I use social media to stay connected, post the occasional picture, and keep in touch with friends and family. My profiles were private, locked down, visible only to the people I trusted. Or so I thought. It started with a few strange notifications. My phone buzzed one afternoon, alerting me to new activity on my social media. I opened the app, expecting the usual stream of likes or comments, but what I found made my stomach drop. There, posted on my account, were a series of disturbing messages. I hadn't written them, and yet, they were there for all to see. The words were cryptic, unsettling. They spoke about deeply personal things, details of my life that I had never shared online, not even with close friends. The messages referenced a recent breakup I had gone through, calling it inevitable and deserved. They mentioned personal struggles I had kept to myself, things only a handful of people knew. My heart pounded as I scrolled through them, trying to make sense of how they had gotten there. I immediately deleted the posts and changed my passwords, thinking that maybe my account had been hacked. It was a logical assumption, but the content of the messages felt too personal to be a random act of hacking. Someone knew about my life intimately, and they were using that knowledge to rattle me. For a few days, everything seemed normal again. I tightened my security settings, checked my online accounts obsessively, and thought maybe, just maybe, it had been a one-time thing. But then, the notifications came again. More posts. More disturbing messages. This time, they were even worse. Whoever was doing this wasn't just posting vague threats or cryptic comments. They were referencing specific places I had been that day, down to the hour. Hope you enjoyed your coffee at 3 p.m. The barista didn't look too happy with your order. I froze when I read that. I had, in fact, gone to a coffee shop that day around 3 p.m. I hadn't posted about it, hadn't told anyone I was going. The only way someone could have known that detail was if they had been watching me. The feeling of being watched, of being tracked, was overwhelming. My safe, ordinary life suddenly felt exposed, like my every move was under a microscope. And it wasn't just the coffee shop. The posts went on to mention conversations I had had, places I had visited, even private moments when I thought I was completely alone. I didn't just delete the posts this time. I reported them to the platform, flagged my account for suspicious activity, and reached out to their support team. They assured me they were investigating, but the process was slow. They recommended I change my passwords again, review my privacy settings. It was all standard protocol, but it didn't address the core issue: someone was targeting me, and I had no idea who. As the days went on, the messages became more personal, more invasive. They mentioned things about my family, private conversations I had had with close friends. It wasn't just about what I did, it was about who I was, about the deepest parts of my life that no one should have access to. I began to suspect everyone around me. Every stranger on the street felt like a potential threat. Was someone following me, watching me? The posts seemed to come from nowhere, but the details they contained were too precise to be a coincidence. I became paranoid, constantly checking over my shoulder, scanning my phone for signs of intrusion. I stopped sharing anything online, even with close friends. I locked down every account, added two-factor authentication, and even deleted old posts that might give someone more information about me. But the messages didn't stop. One afternoon, I received an email from a burner account, no name, no identifying information, just a single line of text that sent a chill down my spine. It's not just your social media I control. That was the breaking point. I went to the police, bringing with me screenshots of the posts, the email, and every unsettling message I had received. They took my case seriously, though they warned me that tracing anonymous accounts and online activity was often difficult. I knew that, but I had to try something. In the meantime, I contacted a cybersecurity expert. He combed through my devices, checking for malware, phishing attempts, anything that could explain how someone had gained access to my life. The expert was thorough, but he found nothing obvious. My accounts weren't compromised, at least not in the usual ways. Whoever was doing this had found a way to get in that left no trace. The police investigation dragged on with little progress. The posts slowed down after I reported the harassment, but every time a new one appeared, it felt like a punch to the gut. Even though the frequency had lessened, the damage was done. I no longer trusted my own privacy. Weeks turned into months, and eventually the posts stopped altogether. The police couldn't find the perpetrator, and the cybersecurity expert had no new leads. It was as if whoever had been tormenting me had simply decided to move on. But the silence wasn't comforting, it was unsettling. I wondered every day when it might start again, when the next message would appear out of nowhere, pulling me back into that nightmare. The experience changed me. I no longer felt safe online, no longer trusted the platforms I had once used so freely. Every time I posted something, I hesitated, wondering who might be watching, who might use that information against me. I locked down my life, both online and off, becoming hyper-aware of what I shared and who I shared it with. Even now, long after the posts stopped, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still out there, waiting. That, with just a few keystrokes, they could re-enter my life and turn it upside down again. Because once your privacy has been violated in such a personal way, it's hard to ever feel truly safe again. Story 13. It was late in the evening when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I was half distracted, lounging on the couch after a long day, and almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up, maybe just curiosity. The voice on the other end was surprisingly warm and familiar. "Hey, it's Alex from college," he said, with the kind of ease that comes from old friendships. It took me a second, but I eventually placed him Alex, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. We'd been friends back in school, though not particularly close. Our paths had drifted apart after graduation, and I hadn't given him much thought since. But hearing his voice stirred something nostalgic. We talked for a while, catching up on life. He mentioned mutual friends, asked about my job, shared some memories from the old days. It felt comforting, in a way, like revisiting a simpler time. After a few minutes, though, the questions started to feel a bit odd. "So how's work going?" "Still at the same office. I heard you were up for a promotion." I paused. I hadn't mentioned my job to anyone in years, and definitely not to Alex. It was a casual enough question, but something about it felt off. He continued talking, filling in the silence with more specific details about my life, things I hadn't told him or anyone recently. "You still going to that little cafe on Elm Street?" "I used to see you there all the time, back when we hung out." My skin prickled. That cafe was somewhere I'd only started frequenting in the last year. There was no way Alex would know that unless he'd been keeping tabs on me. But he continued talking, his tone still light, friendly, as if he wasn't rattling off details about my life that he shouldn't have known. I tried to keep the conversation casual, but my mind was racing. How did he know so much? When we finally ended the call, Alex suggested we meet up, maybe grab coffee at a specific spot, one I had only mentioned to a few close friends. I agreed, but as soon as I hung up, a sense of unease settled in. I started to go over the conversation in my head, replaying the details he had mentioned. It wasn't just casual curiosity, he had known specifics. Too many specifics. I decided to look up Alex on social media. Surely if he'd reconnected with me, he would have some sort of online presence, right? But what I found was strange. There were several profiles with his name, but none of them matched up with the Alex I remembered. They either had old, outdated photos, or no mutual friends at all. Nothing added up. Something wasn't right. I ran a reverse lookup on the phone number that had called me. The result wasn't tied to anyone I knew. It was untraceable, one of those generic lines that could be from anywhere. My unease deepened. The next morning, I decided to reach out to a mutual friend from college, someone who might know if Alex had been asking around about me. When I brought it up, my friend's response only made things worse. "No one's heard from Alex in years," she said. "I thought he moved out of the country. Why?" I didn't tell her the full story, just shrugged it off. But my mind was spinning. If no one had heard from him, who had called me? A few days later, I got another call from the same unknown number. This time, I didn't answer. A voicemail came through a few minutes later. Alex's voice again, only now there was something more insistent in his tone. "I was hoping we could meet up soon. I've been thinking a lot about you. It's been too long." There was something in his voice that felt off. The familiarity had turned to something else, something more unnerving. I replayed the voicemail several times, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But no matter how many times I listened, the undercurrent of urgency, of insistence, was there. That's when I decided to go to the police. I told them everything, the calls, the strange questions, the fact that no one else seemed to have been in touch with Alex. They took my statement seriously and said they'd look into it, but there wasn't much to go on. The number was untraceable, and without more concrete proof, it was just an odd case of a suspicious call. Still, they warned me to be cautious and to avoid any further contact with Alex. Over the next few weeks, the calls continued, though less frequently. Each time, the voicemails grew a little more personal, a little more invasive. I know you're busy, but I really want to catch up. It's important. It feels like you're avoiding me. I thought we were friends. By now, it was clear that whoever this was, it wasn't Alex. Or at least not the Alex I used to know. The police continued their investigation, but there were no breakthroughs. Whoever was behind the calls had covered their tracks well. I took extra precautions, locking down my social media, changing my passwords, even altering my daily routine so I wouldn't be as easy to track. But the calls left me shaken, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering who was watching. One day the calls stopped. Just like that, silence. But instead of relief, it only left me with more questions. Why had they stopped? Had the person behind them moved on? Were they planning something else? The sudden silence was just as unsettling as the calls themselves. I never found out who had been on the other end of those calls. The police eventually closed the case, citing a lack of evidence. But the experience left me with a lingering sense of vulnerability. Even now, every time my phone rings with an unknown number, my heart races, and I wonder if Alex is still out there, waiting to call again. Because once someone has found a way into your life, even if only through a phone call, you never feel completely safe again. Story 14. It started out as a minor annoyance, something I barely noticed at first. My car's GPS had been acting up for a few weeks, glitching every now and then, freezing in the middle of my drive, or showing my location miles from where I actually was. I shrugged it off as just another software issue, something that would be fixed with the next update. But one rainy evening, as I drove home from work, the GPS took a darker turn. I was in the middle of the city, navigating through the usual traffic, when the screen flickered and suddenly displayed a location I didn't recognize. It showed me driving along a road I had never been on, miles from where I actually was. The unsettling part wasn't just the malfunction, it was that this road wasn't even nearby. It was somewhere far outside of town. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just another glitch, but a creeping unease started to build. I wasn't sure why, but something about it felt off. Almost too specific to be a random error. The next morning, I found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. The envelope was damp from the rain, the ink slightly smeared, but the message was clear. I see you're having trouble with your GPS. Maybe it's time to look into it. My heart skipped a beat. Who would leave a note like that? How could anyone know about my car's GPS issues? I hadn't told anyone about it. No one could possibly be aware of something so insignificant, unless they were watching me. I tossed the note aside, forcing myself to stay calm. It had to be a prank, a coincidence, anything but what my gut was telling me. But the glitching continued. Over the next few days, the GPS would show me in places I hadn't been, or lead me to roads that didn't exist. And the strange notes kept coming. The second one arrived after I stayed late at the office. This time, it wasn't left on my windshield, but was taped directly to my front door. I know where you were tonight. You might want to be more careful. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This was no coincidence. Someone was tracking me, and it wasn't just through my car's GPS. They were watching my every move, following me, somehow always one step ahead. I took my car to a mechanic, someone I trusted, and asked him to take a look at the GPS system. He ran diagnostics and assured me everything was functioning normally. It's Probably just a software glitch, he said, handing me back the keys. Nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was much more than that. The next day, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. When I answered, a man's voice greeted me. He didn't give his name, only calling himself an investigator. His tone was calm, professional, but there was something unsettling in the way he spoke. He told me that there had been reports of cars with compromised GPS systems, people's locations being hacked, and used to track them without their knowledge. He wanted to know if I'd noticed anything unusual. My skin went cold. I told him everything, the glitches, the notes, the feeling that someone had been following me. He listened patiently, then advised me to have my car's GPS checked for tampering. This is more serious than you think, he said. Be careful. That was all I needed to hear. I took my car back to the mechanic, this time insisting on a full inspection. It took hours, but eventually he found something. The GPS system had been tampered with. Someone had hacked into it, rerouting signals and tracking my movements. I felt a wave of nausea. Whoever was doing this wasn't just playing pranks. They had access to my every location, every drive I took. They were watching me in real time, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. The mechanic helped me remove the compromised GPS system and installed a new, secure one. I also contacted the police, providing them with the notes and all the information I had gathered. They launched an investigation, but progress was slow. Tracking down a hacker with nothing more than a few notes was proving to be a challenge. I tried to go about my life, but every time I got into my car, I felt a gnawing sense of dread. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, changing up my routes, avoiding familiar patterns. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that someone was still watching. The letters continued, though less frequently. Each one contained snippets of information about my daily routine, my movements, where I'd been shopping or eating. It was terrifyingly precise, like someone was keeping a close eye on me at all times. Then, one night, I received a particularly cryptic message. It's not just about where you go, but who you trust. It was clear this was more than just a game to them. It was personal. They wanted me to feel unsafe, to doubt the people around me. I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I contacted the original investigator who had reached out to me, hoping he could help me further. He suggested additional security measures, surveillance cameras for my home, encrypting my digital communications, and changing my phone and email passwords. A few nights later, I was reviewing footage from the cameras I'd installed. My heart raced as I watched a shadowy figure lurking outside my home, always careful to avoid stepping into the light. It wasn't a random passerby. This person had been there before. It was deliberate. I shared the footage with the police, who finally managed to narrow down a suspect. It turned out to be a former employee of a tech company, a cybersecurity expert, who had been fired under questionable circumstances. He had the skills, and apparently the motive, to disrupt my life. He was arrested, and I should have felt relieved, but the experience had shaken me to my core. The police assured me that it was over. My car was safe, my home secure. But no amount of reassurance could erase the violation I had felt, knowing that someone had been tracking my every move, watching me, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. In the weeks that followed, I took more precautions. I locked down my digital presence, installed more security measures, and became hyper-vigilant about who I trusted. But no matter how much distance I put between myself and the events, the fear lingered. Every time I drove down a quiet road, every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number, I couldn't help but wonder if someone's still watching. Because once your sense of safety is shattered, it's hard to believe it can ever truly be restored. Story 14. It started innocently enough. I'd been feeling the effects of long hours at work, sitting at a desk day in and day out, my muscles stiff and my energy drained. I knew it was time to get back into shape, so I signed up for a local gym and joined a high-intensity interval training class. The class was everything I needed: invigorating, challenging, and filled with like-minded people pushing their limits. Each session left me breathless but exhilarated, and soon enough, I started noticing improvements. My stamina increased, and my mood lifted. The instructor was motivating, and the other participants were friendly but focused on their own goals. It was exactly what I had hoped for, except for him. He wasn't someone you'd notice at first, just another guy in his late 30s, fit, with an intense focus. He always arrived early, meticulously adjusting his equipment, watching the others as they set up for class. At first, I thought he was just dedicated. Everyone had their quirks, and it wasn't unusual for people to take their workouts seriously. But as the weeks went by, something about his behavior began to feel off. During breaks, he'd make comments, not just the usual gym banter, but things that felt oddly specific. "Looks like you're focusing on your core a lot lately," he'd say with a knowing smile. Or, "You really pushed it hard today, didn't you? You must be training for something." It seemed like nothing at first, just friendly observations. But then the comments became more frequent and more personal. He always seemed to know what I was working on, exactly which exercises I had been doing, the weights I was lifting, even the areas I was struggling with. It was as if he was tracking my progress more closely than I was. One day, during a cool-down stretch, I caught sight of him in the corner of the gym. He wasn't stretching or resting like the rest of us. Instead, he was sitting with a small notebook, scribbling something down. It seemed innocent enough, until I noticed my name at the top of the page. My stomach flipped. I watched as he flipped through the pages, writing more notes. It was then that I realized he wasn't just keeping track of his own progress, he was keeping track of mine. I didn't say anything at the time, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me long after the class ended. The next few sessions were more of the same. He'd scribble in his notebook, always casting glances in my direction, jotting down details that I couldn't possibly understand. I started paying closer attention, noticing the way he lingered after class, watching the others, making notes. It wasn't just me. He was keeping track of everyone. The more I noticed, the more unnerved I became. His comments, once seemingly harmless, now felt intrusive. He'd mentioned things I hadn't even realized he could have noticed, like how I adjusted my form during a certain lift or how often I came to class. It was as if he had made me his personal project. I tried to shrug it off, but it was impossible to shake the feeling that he was watching me more closely than anyone should. So I decided to confront him. One day after class, I waited until he was packing up his gear and approached him. "Hey, I've noticed you've been keeping notes," I said, trying to keep my tone light but firm. "What exactly are you writing down?" He looked surprised at first, his eyes wide as if I'd caught him doing something wrong. But then he recovered, offering a sheepish smile. "Oh, this," he held up the notebook. "It's just my personal record. I like to keep track of everyone's progress. It helps me stay motivated." I frowned. "Everyone's progress?" He shrugged, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, I find it interesting. Keeps me engaged. Don't worry, it's nothing creepy." But it felt creepy. It felt very creepy. I left the gym that day feeling more uneasy than ever. His explanation didn't sit right with me, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what he was doing wasn't just weird, it was invasive. He wasn't a trainer or an instructor. He had no reason to be tracking anyone's progress but his own. I decided to escalate the matter. The next day, I approached the gym management and explained what was happening. I told them about the notebook, the comments, the way he was watching everyone. They took my concerns seriously and promised to look into it. A few days later, the gym's management pulled me aside. They had spoken to the man, who admitted to keeping the notes but insisted it was just a personal hobby. He claimed he meant no harm and wasn't aware it made people uncomfortable. Management warned him to stop and emphasized that privacy was to be respected. They even put new policies in place to ensure this wouldn't happen again. But the damage was done. Even though he was allowed to continue attending classes, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I became more guarded, more mindful of my surroundings. I didn't trust him, or anyone else for that matter anymore. The gym, once a place of personal growth and empowerment, had become a source of anxiety. I found it difficult to focus on my workouts, always looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was still tracking my every move. I stopped attending classes as frequently, eventually switching to a different gym altogether. The experience left a mark. It wasn't just about one man with a notebook. It was about the violation of personal space, the crossing of boundaries, the feeling that someone had taken something that didn't belong to them, my privacy, my sense of security. I continue to work out, but I'm more cautious now, more guarded. It's a lesson I've learned the hard way, even in spaces that feel safe. You can never be too careful about who's watching and what they're taking from you. Story 16. It was a cold Monday morning when I noticed the envelope sticking out of my mailbox. It was unremarkable, plain white, no return address, nothing to make it stand out from the usual stack of bills and flyers. It felt heavier than it looked, though, as I slipped it out and carried it inside. Maybe it was just my imagination. I tossed it onto the kitchen counter, intending to ignore it for now. But curiosity got the better of me, as it always did. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in tight, handwritten text. As I read the words, a chill ran through me, far colder than the morning air outside. I know what you've done. The letter was full of specific details about my life information, about my family, recent events that had happened at my kids' school, and even my spouse's work schedule. It wasn't a generic threat, it was personal. Every word seemed crafted to make my blood run cold. The last line of the letter was a simple threat: watch your back. Take better care of your family. My heart pounded as I reread the message. How did this person know so much about us? I hadn't shared those details with anyone outside of my immediate circle. The threat felt real, immediate. Whoever had written it clearly knew far more about my life than they should. I didn't hesitate. I called the police and reported the letter. The officer who came to the house was professional, calm, but I could tell he understood the severity of the situation. He took the letter into evidence and promised that they would investigate, but the look in his eyes told me that tracking down an anonymous letter writer was never easy. He advised me to be careful, review our home security, and report anything else unusual. His words stayed with me long after he left. The days that followed were tense. I scrutinized everything, every car that drove by, every stranger on the street. I questioned the neighbors, trying to figure out if anyone had seen anything unusual. But it was all in vain. No one had noticed anything out of the ordinary. Then another letter arrived. This time, the handwriting was sloppier, more rushed, but the contents were just as disturbing. More details about my family, where my children went after school, my spouse's morning routine, my own schedule, even down to what time I left the house each day. The threats had escalated, and the letter ended with another ominous phrase, "See you soon." I barely slept that night. My thoughts raced, every creak in the house setting my nerves on edge. I double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, installed motion sensor lights outside, and even considered buying a security camera. But no matter what I did, it felt like I was being watched, like someone was out there, just beyond the edges of my vision. The third letter arrived just days later. This one described an upcoming family outing we had planned for the weekend. We hadn't told anyone about it, not even close friends or family. It was just a quiet conversation between my spouse and me, a plan to take the kids to a local park for a picnic. The letter warned us not to go, promising consequences if we did. That was when I knew we were being watched. Closely. Constantly. The realization made my skin crawl. Someone wasn't just collecting random details, they were observing us, tracking our movements, listening to our private conversations. I canceled the picnic. My family didn't argue, they were just as frightened as I was. I spent the next few days in a constant state of paranoia, jumping at every sound, wondering if the person sending these letters was nearby, watching me at that very moment. Despite my best efforts, the letters kept coming. They arrived like clockwork, each one containing new threats, new personal details that they couldn't have known unless they were close, watching. The police investigation moved slowly, painfully slowly. The officers were sympathetic, but they had little to go on. No fingerprints, no identifiable handwriting, nothing to trace. So I hired a private investigator, someone with experience in stalking cases. He reviewed the letters, checked our home for any signs of surveillance, and started his own investigation. He suspected that whoever was sending the letters either had direct access to our personal information or had found a way to track us without being detected. We tightened security even further. More locks, more cameras, more precautions. I scrubbed my online presence, deleted old posts, made sure my social media was locked down. I told friends and family to keep quiet about our plans, to watch out for any unusual activity. And still the letters kept coming. They became a daily source of dread. Each new letter arrived with the same meticulous detail, referencing things that no one outside my family could have known. My stomach dropped every time I opened the mailbox, afraid of what new horrors I'd find inside. Then, one day, a letter arrived that was different. The handwriting was messy, hurried, almost frantic. The contents were disjointed, less coherent than before, and ended with a strange plea for forgiveness. The writer claimed to be sorry for the distress they had caused, but there was no clear explanation, no offer of peace, just a vague apology and another cryptic threat. The police and private investigator continued to search, but the case remained unresolved. The letters stopped coming shortly after that strange apology. At first, the silence was a relief, but soon it became just as unsettling as the letters themselves. Why had they stopped? Had the person lost interest? Or had they simply moved on to something else, some new way of watching us, tracking us, threatening us? I still don't know. And maybe I never will. The silence is both a comfort and a curse. Every day that passes without a letter feels like a victory. But there's always a part of me that wonders when it will start again, when the next letter will arrive, bringing with it a fresh wave of fear. In the end, the letters changed me. They made me more cautious, more vigilant. But they also made me realize how fragile our sense of security really is. All it takes is one anonymous threat to shake the foundations of your life, to make you question everything and everyone around you.